Imagine an army of rubber tanks, loudspeakers broadcasting the sounds of a division that doesn't exist, radio operators impersonating units 100 miles away. This wasn't Hollywood, this was war. From the beaches of Normandy to the banks of the Rhine River, 1,100 American soldiers fought not with bullets, but with illusions. They were artists, sound engineers, and designers turned soldiers. Their weapons were creativity, deception, and extraordinary courage. For 50 years, their story remained classified. Now we know how the Ghost Army, officially the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, helped win World War II by convincing the German Wehrmacht that phantom divisions were real, and real divisions were somewhere else entirely. This is the untold story of the men who turned deception into an art form. June 1944. Allied forces had landed in Normandy, but the fight to liberate Europe was just beginning. Every mile gained cost lives. Every German division pulled from one sector and deployed to another could tip the balance of a battle. By late 1944, the Allies faced a critical problem. They needed to move massive forces across France and into Germany, but German intelligence was watching. Aerial reconnaissance, radio intercepts, local informants, the Wehrmacht had eyes and ears everywhere. The British had already proven that battlefield deception worked. During the Second Battle of El Alamein in 1942, British forces disguised tanks as trucks and created dummy supply depots to mislead German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel about where the attack would come. It worked spectacularly. American military planners took notice. In London, Colonel Billy Harris and Major Ralph Ingersoll, both experienced officers, conceived an audacious idea: create a mobile multimedia tactical deception unit, not just camouflage, but a complete theatrical operation that could move up and down the front lines impersonating real American divisions. The goal was simple but profound: make the Germans look the wrong way at the wrong time and save American lives in the process. On January 20, 1944, at Camp Forest, Tennessee, the plan became real. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was activated. Its mission? Deception on an unprecedented scale. The Ghost Army wasn't recruited like ordinary units. The Army actively sought men with unusual skills: artists from New York and Philadelphia art schools, architects, set designers, radio specialists, and sound engineers. Men whose peacetime careers had been in advertising agencies, theater, and broadcasting. Among them were future luminaries: fashion designer Bill Bloss, minimalist painter Ellsworth Kelly, wildlife artist Arthur Singer, and photographer Art Kane. But in 1944, they were just young men with high intelligence scores and creative minds. The unit's average IQ was reportedly 119, one of the highest in the Army. These weren't typical soldiers, and everyone knew it. The 23rd consisted of 4 distinct components. The 603rd Engineer Camouflage Battalion handled visual deception, the inflatable equipment and dummy installations. The 332nd Signal Service Company managed sonic deception, using cutting-edge sound technology. The 244th Signal Operations Company created fake radio traffic to fool enemy signals intelligence. And the 406th Engineer Combat Company provided security and construction support. Leading them was Colonel Harry L. Reeder, a veteran commander with experience studying tactical innovations. But even Reeder was walking into uncharted territory. There was no manual for this kind of warfare. Standard operating procedures had to be invented from scratch. The men trained intensively through spring 1944, learning not just to set up equipment, but to think like actors. They would need to impersonate entire divisions, adopting their insignia, their radio call signs, even their commanding officers' personalities. By May 1944, shortly before D-Day, the bulk of the Ghost Army shipped out to England. They were ready to take the stage. The audience would be the German Army. The stakes couldn't be higher. The Ghost Army's arsenal looked nothing like conventional military hardware. Their primary weapons were created by the U.S. Rubber Company,
inflatable decoys weighing just 93 pounds each that could be set up in minutes. These rubber dummies included M4 Sherman tanks, howitzers, half-tracks, trucks, and even small reconnaissance aircraft. Using gasoline-powered air compressors, 4 men could inflate a 40-ton tank in about 15 minutes. From a distance, or more importantly, from German reconnaissance aircraft, they looked completely authentic. The camoufleurs painted careful details, wear patterns, mud splashes, identification markings. Nothing could be obviously fake. The deception extended to entire installations, motor pools with neat rows of vehicles, artillery batteries with ammunition stacked nearby, airfields with planes parked in precise formations. The visual staging went beyond rubber. Men hung fake laundry on clotheslines. They used bulldozers to create tank tracks leading to and from positions. They erected signs pointing to headquarters that didn't exist. Every detail mattered. But visual deception was only one layer. Radio deception was equally crucial. The 244th Signal Operations Company created entire fake radio networks, impersonating real divisions that had actually moved elsewhere. Each radio operator has a unique style and Morse code, a fist, that experienced listeners can recognize. Ghost Army operators studied the styles of real operators from units they were impersonating, mimicking them perfectly so German signals intelligence wouldn't detect that the actual unit had departed. Then came sonic deception, perhaps the most innovative element. Working with engineers from Bell Labs, the Army developed a revolutionary sound system. First, at Fort Knox, they recorded authentic sounds: tanks moving, artillery being assembled, trucks in convoy, bridge construction, even sergeants shouting orders. These recordings were recorded onto magnetic wire recorders, state-of-the-art technology at the time, with up to 30 minutes of continuous audio. The recordings were then played back through massive 500-pound speaker systems mounted on M10 tank destroyers or half-tracks.
The power was staggering. These speakers could project sound up to 15 miles away. Imagine standing miles from the front line and hearing what sounded like an entire armored battalion assembling in the darkness. The psychological impact on enemy commanders was exactly what the Ghost Army needed. Weather, terrain, and time of day all affected how sound traveled. The sonic units even carried mobile weather stations to calculate optimal speaker angles and volume levels for each mission. Finally, there was what the unit called special effects, atmospheric touches that completed the illusion. Men wore fake shoulder patches of the units they were impersonating. They drove vehicles with fabricated division markings. And critically, they went into local cafes and bars in recently liberated French towns, loudly discussing their fake units' movements within earshot of anyone who might report to German intelligence. It was theater. It was technology. It was espionage, and it all had to work together perfectly, often within yards of the enemy. The Ghost Army's baptism by fire came at Brest, a strategic port on France's western coast. German forces under General Hermann Bernhard Ramke had dug in with roughly 30,000 troops, determined to hold the city to the bitter end. 3 American divisions, the 2nd, 8th, and 29th Infantry, encircled Brest, but the 6th Armored Division had been withdrawn for other operations. The Ghost Army's mission? Make the Germans believe the 6th was still there. This was the first operation where the 23rd used all their tools together: visual, sonic, and radio deception. 50 inflatable tanks were deployed. Sonic trucks positioned themselves within 500 yards of German lines, close enough to hear enemy voices, and played recordings of armor moving into position for 3 consecutive nights. They even created fake artillery batteries using flash canisters that simulated muzzle flashes, drawing German counter-battery fire away from real American artillery positions. It worked. The German batteries targeted the phantom guns, while the real ones remained safe. But Brest taught a harsh lesson. Through a coordination failure, Company D of the 709th Tank Battalion attacked exactly where the Ghost Army had drawn German attention.
5 tanks were immediately destroyed by concentrated artillery fire. The Ghost Army witnessed men die because of their deception, a sobering reminder that this wasn't a game. After Brest fell in September 1944, captured German commander Romke stated he'd held out against 3 infantry divisions and 1 armored division. The phantom armor had been real in his mind. During General George Patton's assault on the fortified city of Metz, a dangerous 70-mile gap opened in the American line. The 83rd Infantry Division was delayed, leaving a critical vulnerability. For 8 days, an unusually long deception operation, the Ghost Army held that gap by impersonating the 6th Armored Division. They inflated tanks, broadcast radio traffic, and used sonic deception to convince German forces that a strong armored presence guarded that sector. Sergeant Victor Dowd remembered the sonic operations. Massive sounds of tank tracks racing through forests, loudspeakers blaring, sergeants' voices yelling to put out cigarettes. All fakery, all crucial to buying time until real forces arrived. The Germans never exploited the gap. The deception worked.
The Ghost Army's final and greatest performance came in March 1945 as the 9th U.S. Army prepared to cross the Rhine River into Germany, the last major obstacle before reaching the German heartland. The 9th Army planned to cross with 16 corps in the north, but to prevent German reinforcements, the Ghost Army had to convince the enemy the crossing would happen 10 miles south in 13 Corps sector. This required impersonating 2 entire divisions, the 30th and 79th Infantry, roughly 40,000 men. Over 600 inflatable vehicles were deployed. Multiple phony headquarters were established with officers pretending to be colonels and generals. Sonic trucks operated around the clock. At night, they played sounds of massive troop convoys arriving. During the day, recordings of heavy construction, the distinctive sounds of pontoon bridges being assembled. Real engineering units attached to the deception even constructed some actual bridge sections to add credibility. The radio deception was equally elaborate, creating the signal traffic of 2 full divisions preparing for a major assault. Intelligence reports confirmed it worked. German forces repositioned to defend against the phantom crossing. When the real 30th and 79th Divisions attacked with 16 Corps miles to the north on March 23, they met only disorganized resistance. Captured German documents showed they had completely misidentified American positions. 9th Army G2 stated the actual crossing came as a complete surprise to the enemy. The 30th and 79th suffered remarkably few casualties. One Army analyst later wrote that the Ghost Army's efforts, rarely if ever has there been a group of such a few men which had so great an influence on the outcome of a major military campaign. Military historians estimate that Operation Viersen alone may have saved thousands of American lives. The Ghost Army operated under constant danger. These weren't rear-echelon troops playing games in safety. They regularly set up operations within sight and sound of German positions, often ahead of actual front-line units. 3 Ghost Army soldiers were killed in action, dozens more were wounded. When German artillery targeted their positions, the explosions destroyed rubber instead of steel, but the shrapnel didn't distinguish between real and fake targets. The men knew the moral weight of what they did. Their deceptions weren't designed to create spectacular explosions or rack up enemy casualties. The goal was always to misdirect attention, to make German commanders deploy forces to defend against threats that didn't exist. Every successful deception meant real American soldiers, attacking elsewhere, faced weaker resistance. Real divisions moved safely while phantom ones drew enemy focus. Real lives were saved because fake armies seemed more threatening. The survivors often spoke with humility about their work. They were artists and designers who'd become soldiers, doing what needed to be done. No glory-seeking, no grandstanding, just quiet professionalism under extraordinary pressure. The ethics were clear to them. Deception that saves lives is a legitimate tool of war. And in this war against Nazi tyranny, every life saved mattered.
When the war in Europe ended in May 1945, the Ghost Army's work was done. The unit returned to the United States and was deactivated on September 15, 1945. But the soldiers couldn't celebrate publicly. They were sworn to strict secrecy. Their equipment was classified. Their operations remained buried in restricted files. Even their families couldn't know the full truth.
Why? The Army anticipated needing similar deception capabilities in any future conflict, particularly against the Soviet Union. Revealing methods and techniques would compromise future operations. For 50 years, these men carried their secrets. Some died never having told their children what they'd really done in the war. Others gave vague answers, saying they'd worked in special operations or engineering. In 1996, the military finally declassified the Ghost Army's records. Suddenly, aging veterans could talk. Historians could research. The story began emerging from the shadows. A 2013 PBS documentary brought wider attention. Books by historians Rick Beyer and others documented the operations in detail. Museums created exhibits featuring actual inflatable equipment and original artwork created by the soldier artists. In February 2022, President Biden signed legislation awarding the Congressional Gold Medal to the Ghost Army, one of the nation's highest civilian honors. The few surviving members, now in their late 90s, finally received public recognition. The Ghost Army's legacy extends beyond history books. Modern military information operations, psychological warfare, and cyber deception all trace conceptual roots to these World War II pioneers. They proved that in warfare, perception can matter as much as firepower. The inflatable tanks are long gone, recycled for training exercises after the war, but the principle endures. Sometimes the most effective weapon is the one that makes the enemy look the wrong way. 1,100 men, rubber tanks, sound effects on wire recorders, fake radio traffic crackling through the night. The Ghost Army proved that warfare isn't always about superior firepower. Sometimes it's about superior creativity, about understanding that the enemy's perceptions shape their decisions, about recognizing that an illusion executed with discipline and courage can be as deadly as an armored division. In the annals of World War II, filled with stories of heroism and sacrifice, the Ghost Army stands apart. They fought with paintbrushes and loudspeakers. They saved lives not by taking them, but by making the enemy waste resources defending against threats that existed only in imagination. History sometimes turns not on thundering artillery, but on quiet creativity. If you want to hear more untold stories from World War II, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments which hidden operation you'd like us to cover next. The archives are deep, and the stories are waiting. Until next time, remember, in war, as in life, things aren't always what they seem.